everyone. I hope everyone's having a great Wednesday afternoon. It's so good to be here with you all. If you are chiming in, please let us know where you are watching from, what city and state you're watching from. We'd love to know. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ruby Garcia. I'm a leadership and life coach, also the principal and founder of Ruby Garcia Coaching. And this is the place where every week we have conversations about what it means to be Latina. And we know that this looks different, and there's many, different ways this shows up, and the experiences that we have are very different. And I'm excited about this conversation this week in particular because it's very close to home. So a while ago, okay, awesome. We got Chicago on the listening in. But this conversation, I had posted a while ago about a speech that Becky G had given. LinkedIn user, it is definitely live. I see some comments coming in. We're live now. So I posted a while ago, maybe a month or so ago, about a piece that Becky G had said in an acceptance speech of an award. And it really kind of hit home to me because I felt like she hit on something that I have, experienced. And I'm going to read what she said. She said, she described herself as a 200%er, a Chicana, a proud Mexican American, as someone who prides herself in loving in two languages. And she had a few words of advice. I want to say this to other 200%ers. It may be a lonely road to pursue things we were never taught. Some of our own might even make us feel bad for wanting more, and our own minds might even tell us that we have no place of belonging because we've been told que no somos ni de aquí ni de allá. But I know firsthand que sí vale la pena. And like that just really, and I watched it. There's a YouTube video, and I'll see if I can find the link and put it in here. But that really just hit home with me. And so I kind of reposted something and about that. And then I just added some of my own personal experiences because growing up with, I always describe myself, I grew up with a Mexican mother that we listened to Los Bukis, and I got Ana Gabriel y Los Temerarios on Saturday mornings while cleaning house. And then Sunday morning with my American stepdad, we were like listening to Eric Clapton and Roy Orbison and Blondie and Fleetwood Mac. And, it was like eating brunch, right? And so I always felt like I had one foot like living in two different places, right? And even with my family, it was kind of like I had my Mexican side of my family and my American side of my family. And because of that, the way that I grew up was, it was just a different experience, I guess you could say. And so I was talking to Maria, who we have here with us today, and we were just having a cafecito, and something came up about like, oh, you have an American stepdad too? Oh, me too. And so there was this, automatic kind of connection over this because we're not the only ones. And when I had shared that post of Becky G and sharing my personal experiences, I got flooded with all these emails and DMs and, comments about like, oh, I totally, this resonates with me. And so I just wanted to have this conversation about kind of growing up bicultural, whether it's a Latino. Today we're kind of talking specifically about growing up with like maybe a Latino parent and a white parent, but, apply it to whatever your situation is, because it's just, this is a real experience that people have, but we don't really talk about it. So without further ado, that's kind of the context for today's conversation. Thanks for joining in. And if you haven't, let us know where you're calling in from. Eric says, thanks for the session. Isela is listening in from Los Banos. Jane is, hey, Jane from New York. Okay. Lauren says, I'm in. Good. We're so glad you're here. Hello from New Hampshire. Ruby's pretty spectacular. Just saying. Thank you, Amber. You're also my cousin, and I love you for it. Calling in from north of Seattle, recently moved back to Washington after being in Minnesota for 4 years. Hey Faye, how you doing? So we got Chicago representing, so we have people from all over. So I'm so glad to be having this conversation. Let's make sure my charger isn't going to go out on me. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and get started here. Make sure my battery's not going to die here. Sorry, I thought it was connected. Okay. All right. With that being said, I want to introduce our guest. Actually, I'm going to have our guest introduce themselves and tell us a little more about, who they are, what they do. Oh, we got Mexico representing even. Yay, Mexico, and Fresno, California too. So, thank you for joining us. So, Maria and Jocelyn, if you could just tell us a little more about, who you are, what you do, and a little about your cultural background.
I can go first. Hi, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Hernandez. I live in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago with my partner. I'm engaged. We're getting married soon this year. She is also bicultural, so we have a lot that we relate on. I work in post-secondary access, so helping set young people up to transition into adulthood with a successful plan for what they want to do in life and what makes them excited. I'm also a grad school student at U Chicago, and I'm about to graduate here in June. I'm Yeah, exciting. I'm mixed, so my mom is white, and my dad is Mexican. My family is actually from the Valley. We have a long line of folks from the Valley in Texas, from Mission. So most of my family, I still have family there, but we have about 3 generations who have been born there in the Valley.
Nice. Thank you. You're getting some congratulations, getting some graduation love.
Awesome, Jocelyn. Great to have you. Thank you, Ruby, for organizing this. And hey, Daisy. Hey, Lupita. Thanks for tuning in. Um, I'm Maria Gambo. I'm based in San Diego, former academic turned consultant, historian, immigrant. And my background is I was born in Mexico to Mexican parents, but I had a white stepdad. Growing up, he married my mom when I was like 8. And so we lived in Mexico, so it was not a huge deal. But then when we moved here, it was a deal, especially in college and grad school. And so, yeah, it came up when I was talking to Ruby, that sometimes for me that created some certain dynamics. And to be honest, like I had a lot of shame about it because it was associated with privilege, and we can get into that. But that's my story. And I thought about this when I heard a podcast recently about being biracial, and I was like, I never considered myself biracial. I was like, huh, it's interesting that a lot of the stuff they were talking about I could sort of relate to. So happy to have this panel today.
Yeah, thank you. And I forgot to mention I am I mentioned my Mexican mother and my American stepdad, but and my birth father was Mexican, but he died when I was a year and a half old. So my stepdad has been with me forever, and he is who I call dad. I don't even, unless I'm trying to specify why he's like, 6'2" and white and why I'm not like that. Is usually the explanation is my stepdad, but otherwise he is my dad because he raised me and taught me everything from how to ride a bike to how to drive a car, and so on. But all right. So tell me a little about, growing up and what your experience was like. And more like just you can start off at like maybe child.
I think we lost Ruby for a moment, but growing up, I grew up with both my parents, and I have 2 younger sisters. We all grew up together. I spent a lot of time. My white side of my family actually lives in Kansas. So I spent most of my time with my Mexican side of my family in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. And a lot of our time was spent with our cousins and going over there to play. My grandparents were like my main caregivers for, a bulk of my life until I was able to sort of stay at home alone and babysit my sisters. But yeah, that's sort of like the dynamics of my family and who I spent the most time with. Yeah, I don't know, Maria, if you want to kind of tap into.
Yeah. Ruby, we hope you come back. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's really common when I thought about it that my cousins, um, my nieces, my sister, it's pretty common in my family that there was a lot of intermarriage between Latinos or Mexicans, and white Americans. And I don't know if I took it for granted, but I know it's showed up for me. And sometimes it's meant access to privilege, and sometimes it's meant a certain reaction from other Latinos, especially in school. So that's what that's been like.
Yeah, I feel that because it definitely has come up in school, and it's reactions from sort of like both sides, like white people being curious if I'm like, I got asked this question so many times in my life, but like, what are you? I would always get that question asked, especially because I am mixed and I have mixed features. And sort of, my Mexican side of my family calling me "güera" or "gringa." Definitely got that a lot growing up too, and it's really different because my middle sister, she experiences things so much differently because she is very, very light complected, and she has very, very light hair, and she doesn't look like what people perceive to be mixed or Mexican. So our experiences, even within the same household, have been completely different.
Yeah. And I mean, part of the reason we wanted to have this is to talk about, um, well, for me, I'll just say I've been listening to a lot of podcasts about Latinos in professional spaces because there's not really a lot where I work. And so I'm trying to live in a community, I guess, online or whatever. But I haven't heard this experience really described, even though I know it's pretty common. We did some research and I can share those links later, but there's some numbers, but there's about 2.3 million marriages between whites and Latinos, and whites are not a race, so they can be of any race. And that's just married people reported in the census, right? So it's probably higher than that. So I guess just the point is that I felt, like I was saying before, kind of ashamed growing up that, not even that I wasn't reflected, but that there was distrust or whatever, for my experience when I meet people, when I think about my family, the people that I care about, and so many friends I've made in Fresno and just everywhere else. Like it's pretty freaking common, right? And so I just wanted, all this purpose was to have that included in the narrative of what it means to be Latino. Being Latino can also mean growing up in a household with parents different than yourselves, or being mixed or stuff like that. And so I don't think it should be shameful, right? But
Yeah.
I also think it does bring privilege, and it also brings some challenges. So curious if we want to talk about that, and also check in on Ruby. But
Yeah.
what does that bring up for you, Jocelyn?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does carry its privileges and challenges. And I don't think growing up, I grew up in a really homogenous community. So mostly I grew up in a predominantly Mexican community called Round Lake, Illinois. It's like northwest near, oh, hey, Ruby.
Sorry, I don't know what happened. My computer completely shut down. So, but I'm back.
No worries. I was talking a little bit about like the privilege and challenges of growing up like in the household, and I think that growing up I didn't understand privilege, so I didn't feel that or feel privilege. I definitely felt this in the middle feeling that I can talk about a little bit later of like have being a part of multiple cultures. And Ruby, something that you said made so much sense about like listening to certain types of music with, different parents. And that definitely came into effect. But now that I'm older and I think that I understand privilege and what privilege has afforded to me and how I benefit from white privilege, I definitely see that. And understand it a lot more than I did growing up, and even understanding too how that has a dynamic within even my household and within my sisters and my parents, and sort of my mom not really understanding my father and things that he's experienced, and understanding me who I do have different features than my sister. For sure that's definitely come into play and bring something up for me.
And I think, let me see if I picked up on where you left off. I can kind of add to like, I know for myself, like I'm the only one for my my mom's first marriage. So even though I grew up in the exact same family, my mom always thinks it's so weird. She said, I don't understand this, because I feel like my experience was really different as opposed to my siblings. Like, I looked different. I mean, if you see my siblings, like my sister's probably like 5'9", 5'10", like blondish, very light skin, green eyes. My brother too. And then I one of my brothers passed already, but he I guess looked a little more Mexican, right? And so people thought that we were from the same father, and the other ones were from my stepdad. But I was the only one from my mom's first marriage, and so there was always that feeling of kind of, I guess like othered, or not, just feeling different. Even though we grew up in the same household, I felt like the experience were different, and I had this whole other family because I still had my dad's family in Mexico, but we looked different, visually, although we do share a resemblance, obviously, because of my mom, but we still look different. And then also, just growing up, it was like, I say that, like, I didn't even know what code switching. I didn't even know code switching was actually like a thing or a word until maybe like, I don't know, maybe like 5-8 years ago or something like that, 6-8 years ago. And I was like, oh my God, I've been doing this my whole entire life, because I have my Hispanic side of the family, and there was a way to be and act around them. And then I had my white side of the family, and there was a way to be and act around them. And so, and they always felt like two worlds that were distinctly different. And it's funny because I have a very distinct memory, and I have a picture of a birthday party, and I had my favorite cousin from my Hispanic side on one side, sitting next to me on one side, and then I had my favorite cousin that I grew up with on my white side sitting next to me, and I was in the middle. And I remember feeling, even at a young age, feeling like these were two worlds that were colliding, but it was very confusing to me how to be with both of them around at the same time, because I just had a distinct, and it wasn't that I was faking anything. It was just a distinct way of being one around, how I was being around one as opposed to being around the other. And it could be even simple things with, like, greeting with a kiss and a hug, or, stuff like that. And so that was very, just, I remember that feeling of like, I don't know how to be with these two worlds colliding. And I was just a kid at that time, and I just want to read this comment. Growing up, I wasn't believed to be Latina, and it really frustrated me. People around me would just discriminate against Latinos, and I would mention I was half. I would be told, well, not you or your family. Come to find out, my partner, who's also biracial, experienced similar conversations around them as being a light-skinned Latino. So, and then someone else said they just learned about code switching. I don't know. Do you, Maria or Jocelyn, feel like that any of that kind of lands with you, or was your experience different?
I mean, I saw it show up the older I got, when there's actual implications to to identity.
Yeah.
Um,
Tell me more.
yeah. So, and when I looked back on my childhood and was like, oh, I didn't even know that was happening. So, for example, like when I enrolled in high school, my stepdad went with me, right? And I was coming from Mexico, so all my like transcripts and grades were from Mexico, and it's really good that I went with him because they put me in all AP classes. Now I know that, right? Because I didn't know about tracking. I didn't know about like just how much discrimination exists in schools. Um, Even though, and I mean, they did test me to see if I spoke English and all that, and I had learned English before, but I didn't realize how much privilege I had in that moment. And now that I see just the disparities in education, like discrimination as a mother, as a Latina, the older I get, when I'm not in protected spaces like fancy schools or whatever, like, oh my God, if I had gone in with my mom, they would have probably put me like in ESL classes or something, and she didn't know the system well enough, being an immigrant, to know that they could screw you over so badly, right? Um, and then just the other thing is, like, later when I went to college and I took ethnic studies classes, that created a lot of problems at home, because you learn about just inequities in this country, and it made my stepdad like really defensive. Um, because before that, I never thought about any of that stuff. He was just my stepdad. And, I didn't know race existed, whatever. Maybe I was sheltered, right? And then he would be like, oh no, that stuff is over. Like those struggles are over. That was all solved in the 60s. We're good now. And I was like, that's not what they're telling me, dude. And and then also like he would have views, and I loved him, right? But problematic opinions about just like the way things were. He would say stuff that like Latinas were taking his job because he was in academia, right? And so he saw all these like um programs to increase diversity as like detrimental to him. And this is when I was coming up, so I was like, so you're saying like I'm gonna take your job, like it became more and more problematic. And then just the other thing I'll say is like we also had the immigration thing happening. So my parents met in grad school when I will say I felt like they were kind of on an equal footing. My mom was an international student, so she didn't have to deal with a lot of like racism, or chose to like ignore it, I guess. Um, but and then when we went to Mexico, same thing. Like she was a Mexican in Mexico, and yeah, he was an American in Mexico, and like whatever. But once we moved here for good, everything changed. Like shit got real. And whenever he would get mad at her, he would be like, "Oh well, um, you're with me for papers," or stuff like that. It's like, whoa, dude, you guys have been together for 10 years. Like we barely moved here. Like where's this coming from? So all this like nasty stuff came out that I'd never seen before. So that's a lot of stuff, but that's how it showed up for me. And I'll just say like in terms of code switching, I had to be careful at home because the more I learned, the more careful I had to be about expressing any of that stuff because it wasn't received very well.
Yeah, I can relate to that, and I can even
Me
still
too.
relate to it. Even to this day, the conversations that I have to have are limited. I'll just put it that way. um yeah, and I think, my only other comment too in regards to like privilege and the way that I've seen it show up for myself. I mean, a couple things is like I was raised in a very white conservative suburb, and it was is a middle to upper class town outside of Chicago. So, when I was in high school, it was like I was one of a handful of Mexicans that sat at the Mexican lunch table. But I think also it's funny. I don't think I realized this till later in life, but I think like, being light skinned, definitely a privilege, I was born here, so having my status was also another privilege. Uh, speaking the language and not having any issues, and really English is my first language because we didn't speak Spanish at home, and so I didn't learn Spanish until I knew a little bit when I was younger, but then I remember in about the 7th grade, my mom sent me to Mexico to visit my dad's side, my biological father's side of the family, and so I was just kind of immersed in the language, and that's when I started to learn Spanish, and I went, every year from then on out for a while. But knowing English was also the other thing. But it was, so there was a lot there. I feel like I've had a lot of privilege, and at times I've even felt guilty about having some of those privileges, to be honest, from the opposite side of the family. So it has been sometimes, it's not even been one side of the family or the other side family. It's kind of like, a lot of my own identity and journey around identity has been around like, where do I fit in and where do I belong? And now I'd like to say I just belong in all spaces. I'd like to say that, but I got to be honest, that's not always true. But I do believe that we, I feel, I can only speak for myself. I feel like I can use some of my privilege in order to make impact for others that might not have it, right?
Yeah, I've been feeling that lately too, because I feel like with my grad school journey and being in grad school, I learning more about um I won't get super into it with this topic, but just learning about white supremacy in a deeper way, and learning about my proximity to whiteness, whether it be because I grew up with a white mom or because I am mixed. I've learned that, like, I never saw myself as mixed. I always saw myself, because of my family, my Mexican family, I saw myself as Mexican, and it wasn't until I'm older that I'm like, you know what, like, I do have this proximity to whiteness, and I can use it for advocacy. I can use it for different things. And it's part of, like, the whole reason why I'm in school and I do the work that I do. But yeah, that definitely, it's become more evident. And I think as I've gotten older, and I think it's just the more I've learned and the more knowledge I've gained and understanding of, like, the deep rootedness of it all, that I'm able to sort of not feel so ashamed of being, from this background and having this bicultural upbringing. But I do sometimes feel guilty and shame around it, like navigating both cultures and saying, like, am I really Latina? Can I call myself Latina?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here really quick because it's funny because I'm, for some of you who may or may not know, I've been working on a book and it's all about navigating professional spaces as a first gen Latina. And this is literally like the title of my first book is, for the first chapter is, and it hasn't been like, it's still a draft. So it's basically like, am I Latina enough? Because this is exactly how I felt. Like, can I call myself a Latina? I don't dance. I not fluent in Spanish, and I don't like Chile. There, I said it. I don't like Chile. I love like Puerto Rican food. I love Dominican food. I love Cuban food. I love lots of Mexican food too, but I don't like Chile.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but I say that jokingly, but I really did struggle with it. Wasn't really until like where I can say I wholeheartedly embrace myself as Latina, that was only maybe in the last 10 to 12 years, that I could fully say, like, yes, I am Latina enough. Like, I am more than Latina enough. Why do I think that Latina has to look this one certain way, or you grew up in a certain way, or, I really struggled with that too, is like, can I call myself a Latina if I don't speak Spanish, if I didn't grow up in a, you know, how other people I knew grew up, or if my stepdad was white or whatever. So I think that's real. Maria, what do
Yeah.
you think?
Okay, so here's the deal with that. Like, you're not Latina enough. No one is, right? It's,
Mhm.
I just think it's such a joke because my thing is always like, what do you win? What do I win? If I am, what do I win? Is there a prize? Like, do I get money? It's like, it's BS. And I've seen that. I worked in an organization where we worked with youth, right? And I see even in organizations where like we're trying to help people, there's still this culture policing that like no one's ever Latino enough. You don't eat enough chile. You don't know how to eat tacos. You don't know how to, like, people make fun of people for pronouncing stuff wrong. How the hell would you know how to pronounce it if like you never learned?
Yeah.
And like there's all these, like, I got called out because I used in grad school because I used a garlic press. Someone came over and saw me use a garlic press, and she was like, "Oh, you're so white." I was like, okay, like, and there are things she did that I could have called white, but I didn't play those games, right? Because I don't think you win anything. And I think the other thing is, like, there's other privileges besides whiteness. Jesus Christ. Like growing up in a home with two parents, right? Even if they're both Mexican and working class, like having a strong sense of identity, having strong roots to wherever you're from, knowing your language, like being able to be proud of whatever. Like there's other things beyond this that makes you confident in yourself, that makes you have a strong sense of self, that does set you up for success, even though you do overcome a bunch of barriers, a lot of grit, a lot of resilience, yes, but there's other privileges besides this, and I just think it's hilarious because you don't win anything. And I think the reason I'm able to say that is because I feel I have another type of privilege, which is like I speak perfect Spanish, sort of, because I got to grow up there. That's privilege, you know? And so that's why whenever anyone ever tested me, I was like, I'm gonna win. Like, I'm gonna win at being Latina. I'm gonna win, but I don't win anything, right? Because it's not gonna be good enough for you because my parents are not from Zacatecas and, you know, whatever, whatever. So you can't win, but I don't think you win much.
Maria, I'm going to start saying that. I'm going to be like, okay, what do I win? What do you win now?
Me too. I was just thinking I should change that first chapter and have that like the sub headline or something. That's great. I love it.
Because I still get that. I mean, like, it just, that resonates so hard. Even I was having a conversation with my fiance this morning. And I'm like, and we're both mixed, you know, but she grew up predominantly with her Mexican family, didn't really know her white family. So she'll still say things to me like, oh, that's so white that you do that. Or like, you know, white people music. And I'm like, and I was telling her this morning, like, you got to listen to this conversation because it's more than that. and, you know, and no fault to her own, but she's probably like cringing that I'm saying this right now, but it definitely is. It's like, what do you win? And the policing of culture, Maria, like I've never heard it in that way. That's just helping me process even in these moments.
I love this. I got a recommendation. Here's chapter number 1. What do I win if I'm Latina enough? There it is. I'll credit you, Maria. You know, and I don't know if anyone has read, or either of you or anyone in the audience has read You Sound Like a White Girl by Julissa Arce. But it's a really, really great book. And I think I have it here. I'm not going to pull it out because then I've got like 10 books that'll fall on top of it. But, you know, she talks a lot about some of the myths that exist that, you know, like when she was, you know, her whole title is based off of a boy that when she was growing up, I think that maybe she had a crush on, and he's told her, you sound like a white girl. And she took that as a compliment. Right. And then later on, you know, as she got older, really started to like think about what did that mean? And even the title resonates a lot with me because I've been told that before myself. But when she talks about how, you know, the different reasons, and I shared this in the LinkedIn post this morning for some of you that may have seen it, is just how language can also be a gatekeeper to, you know, really, you know, to others, I guess, embrace, you know, whether it goes into the whole story of, are you Latina enough? Right. And she talks about all the different reasons of, you know, why that it's a myth. If Hispanics learn English, then we're going to fit in. Right. She even talks about the colonization of the language and things. So that is there's so much to unpack there. I feel like I have to reread it again just to really dissect. But it, you know, it can be, I feel like you could get judgment from both sides. Like, I feel like sometimes growing up, I would be with my Hispanic side of the family. Not all of them. There are some that I was closer to than others. So I felt comfortable speaking my broken Spanish too, because they didn't judge me on it and it was fine. But there were others that maybe I felt a little more held back or shy about speaking. And so because I was shy or not as outspoken, it was misinterpreted as like more of, they thought I was being presumida, or that I was being like snobby or standoffish. Like I thought I was better than them because of it. So it was just really interesting to see how, you know, sometimes it felt like judgment came from both sides even.
Yeah, I mean, something that you're pointing out is that I'm thinking is just what it means to be racialized in this country as Latino, even though it's not a race, but I've definitely experienced racism. So, that if you look at the data in aggregate, right, like what Latinos do share in common is um, those indicators, right, like income, education, like all these things. And so what it brings to my mind is just that sometimes when people are called like you're being too white is like same thing as saying like you're too uppity, or you think you're better than us, or you want more, or like you're aspiring to more, which brings into attention just like the reality of Latinos in this country as a whole. So that's interesting because I've kind of had different experiences in Chicago and California. I feel like California, there's a lot of Latinos in positions of power, just because historically, or whatever you want to say it. And so, and I think also just I grew up with a Latino majority, so I didn't have a lot of these limiting beliefs until like way later in life, right? And especially when I went to Chicago too, and people, not in U Chicago, right, but like in the outside of U Chicago, like people questioning me, like kind of like, who do you think you are? Why you like doing all that? Why do you want more? And having to come to grips with just the reality of discrimination and exclusion that a lot of people grow up with, like from a really young age. And so I could see that resistance kind of like not that it's warranted, but like I can see kind of like the origins where like people have learned to stop trying sometimes, because like they know, they've seen like how trying like sometimes doesn't work because there's all these barriers. And so I think when I understood more like where that was coming from, because first I was like, what's with all these haters, dude? But then I was like, huh, okay, like some people have had like really tough like lives, experiences, and they don't see any other way. And so they really are confused. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing so much? But that's just kind of heartbreaking too, right? To be like, fuck, man, I'm a part of this group that does have so much, so many barriers, so many challenges, and like maybe I haven't digested all of them, or like maybe I learned them kind of late. Like, good for me, but how sad too, right? And that does bring to question like the responsibility that comes with the privilege or with the access or whatever, of like, I don't know, not to prove yourself, but yeah, I think it's cool like to still be a mentor. And that gets fraught too, because I'll just say like I've been in a lot of groups where there's opportunities given to people that already have privilege, right? A lot of kids who are mixed, a lot of kids who like have parents who already went to college, because that puts into question this myth of the bootstraps, right? That I think what people would want to say is like that there's more opportunity, that there's more equality than there is. And when it's the people with some privilege sometimes that like get those opportunities and become those role models, people get pissed. And I just think in my experience in grad school, it just brings to the forefront like how badly built those institutions are, right? That it's still so rare for someone like starting from scratch to make it. And the fact that like I went to school with so many kids that like, even if they were mixed or whatever, like they were from higher socioeconomic whatever, that's going to guarantee, class is going to guarantee success much more than anything else. And so I don't know, there's all this stuff wrapped in, but I kind of see where they're coming from, and it still sucks.
Maria, when someone made a comment that kind of is like relating to what you're talking to, Katie made a comment that recognizing light skin, white, or access to white privilege is important, but also part of the way white supremacy works is erasure. So the fact that our panelists and so many people on this call are questioning their Latinx identity perpetuates white supremacy. And I think this is something that I didn't know about white supremacy until I started really getting into the deep roots of it and understanding it and how it shows up in the workplace, how it shows up at school, how it shows up like in my everyday life. And I think that that's what really, I mean, there's multiple things that encouraged me to feel, to embrace, and encouraged me and gave me that confidence to embrace my culture. But definitely that was one of the things, is like, you know, for future generations to come, like I want them to know my culture. I want them to know who we are and where we come from and our history and things like that. And I would say the other big part too for me was my partner, who like once we got together, she's like, what do you mean you don't know about this? Like, let me show you. Like, you know, and taking me to places, taking me to see los bukis. Like I had never seen them. And like with her grandma and things like that, and saying like, you are Latina, like you are, like, you know, so many of these things, like you are. So those have been like the two biggest things, is like, I deserve to embrace this, but also like my partner telling me, no, you do deserve this. You are this.
Yeah, and it makes me think about, like, I have two boys, ages 10 and 15, and I would just think about how um, I've tried to connect them to our culture too, and their dad is Mexican as well, so they have um, so he can share a lot more because he grew up, in Mexico, and then came here. He was already, I think, like in high school when he came, but so he's been here longer than there. But his, culture is still really big for him, and so he can share a lot as well. But I just think, it's interesting. I told my son, "Hey, I want to go on vacation this year." My 15-year-old, and where would you like to go? I was like, we could go to, like, I'm naming all these different places, right? And I was very surprised because I didn't name Mexico. Actually, I was, maybe because I've been to Mexico so many times to see family. And he said, "Well, why are we going to any of those places? I want to go to, like, a Latin American country. Like, I'd rather just go and spend time in Mexico." And I realized how important it is for him that he wants to connect with his Mexican roots too and learn. And I'm excited about that because that's what we're planning. Is I'm not quite sure yet. I'm hoping for either around Dia de los Muertos or Christmas to be able to take the boys for a couple week and just really immerse ourselves. And to really, even for me, is an adult, as a parent, to experience it through the lens of my children and having them connect with parts of themselves. And, I tell them the parts that I do know. I mean, I feel like there's still a lot of learning that I have, but I'll tell, even yesterday we were in the car and I said something like, like, we come from warriors and medicine men, and, like, just even little things like that. I'll talk about, like, be proud of your culture. Cause my 10-year-old is in a dual immersion language program. So his Spanish is, he actually probably speaks it better than me. And, but he does not like to speak Spanish. He refuses. He'll speak it all day at school, but he refuses to speak it at home. So it's just really interesting to see how that's showing up even between both of my sons. And, well, I'll let you guys kind of respond here, but I'm going to read this comment really quick. "I didn't realize how much my culture meant to me until I moved to the Midwest and realized there wasn't anyone like me in the workplace. A lot of the time I was the only Latina. I heard someone speaking Spanish behind me one day in the grocery store, and I left and cried because it made me so homesick. Very happy to be in my home state where I can be near my culture and family again." Oh, yes. I live in North Carolina now, and coming from the Chicago area to North Carolina, Maria, I know you're talking about Chicago to California, but even from Chicago to North Carolina, oh my gosh, like, it's so challenging for me here in North Carolina. So if you're in North Carolina and listening, please friend me because I need the connection. But that's real. That's real talk, right? Like, it can be a challenging space to live in this, living in this in between. Sometimes it feels like.
Yeah. And I think that's just for just Latinos more generally, right? Like, opportunities that present themselves, the cost may be higher if you're the only one that looks like you, right? I know in academia, that's one of the reasons I left. I wasn't going to move around as needed, but yeah, that's tough. I wonder what the listeners think too, just of what's landing for them.
Yeah, feel free to drop in the chat, maybe what you're taking away or some of your experiences or how privilege has shown up for you. I'd be really curious for both of you, maybe some of the lessons that you've learned along the way, because I know, we can talk about there's definitely barriers, but I think there's also been some maybe lessons or gifts in it even, I would say.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I think Ruby, you mentioned it, Maria, you mentioned it about code switching, but I would change that into sort of my ability to adapt and move from space to space. I'm so easily adaptable, and that's because I've had to adapt. Like, I don't remember who talked about it, but like going to their cousins, both sides of their family. Like, I had my white grandpa, and then I had my abuelo, and like going into those the families, it was so different. Like, and I think the first time I realized how different it was when I was visiting my family in Kansas, and it was just a different feeling of like just quietness. Music wasn't playing, like, you didn't kiss on the cheek, and no one embraced that. But I think that I had to adapt to that and say, oh, okay, from a young age, okay, we don't do that here, and sometimes that can be a gift and a curse, because sometimes I feel like I don't always bring my full self, or that's a challenge for me. But I'm learning that I think that that's one of the biggest lessons is like show up as your full self and who you are, and like all those parts of who you are and how you grew up, you can show up as all of them at the same time. And that looks like so many different things. And it may be, someone telling me I'm doing something white, but that doesn't make me, like we were talking about, any less Latina, that doesn't make me any less anything. It's just who I am. So definitely adapting has been one of the biggest lessons for me.
Yeah, I think I even got some of my non-Hispanic friends used to hugs and kisses, and they just go for it now. I think the older I've gotten, though, the less that I feel, I don't know if this has come with age or experience, but I think the older that I've gotten, and I think I'm older than, than some of the people listening, is that I've felt less the need to conform. Right. So I just like, and I think also, being that I don't have to work, I don't work for a company anymore. I work for myself. That also gives me the freedom to just show up as I am. And there's no parts that I need to really, assimilate or conform to. I can just show up as I am. And, it's part of the reason I think that I stay independent. Sometimes I think about going back, and then I'm like, yeah, I could deal with the projects, but I don't know if I can deal with some people. Maria, I'll let you respond. I'm just going to read Katie's message here. So glad you brought up kids, Ruby. Since I left the white home I grew up in, I have been on what feels like a never-ending quest to understand my Colombian identity and be unapologetically proud to claim it, which has been really important work. But it feels even more crucial now that I have a 6-month-old. I want him to grow up to be proud of his Latinx and Black identities. Yes. And Katie, I don't know if you've heard of, Canticas? Has anyone heard of Canticas? I want to say it's Canticas. Susie Jaramillo. I'll see if I can find the link and send it to you. But there's a whole, there's board books out there and apps, and it's specifically, kind of culturally relevant books and other merchandise for those that want to connect to their background and share not just stories of like Little Red Riding Hood, but some of the Latino stories, nursery rhymes, and bringing those to books. So I would definitely encourage you to check those out for your 6-month-old. And then we have, and I think this might be Refugio, who I don't know why your name doesn't show up, but he's thinking about the power of ERGs for companies, wondering how we blow out that experience for the nation so we can help Latinos connect to others in a place that feels like home, even if it's virtual.
I mean, all this is real stuff, right? I mean, this comment makes me think about just visibility, and yeah, we need to be content, proud of who we are. I heard a lot from people that when you turn 40, like you really stop caring what anyone thinks. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, I mean, I like who I am, and I don't want to apologize for whatever. No one will ever like it anyway. The I need to like it, right? That's to show up confidently and all that. And in terms of skills, I mean, I was gonna say that marketing, right? Translation, communications, right? Like a message is not going to land the same, unfortunately, for everyone. And so maybe that's a little bit of a trauma response, to be honest. Like, but it is what it is. It's a skill. And I'm very critical of communications sometimes that are all one side, all the other side, like, oh, this is not going to land. And we live in a really polarizing time. getting worse by the minute. Actually, with a lot of pushback to diversity, even. So that's kind of a mess, but these skills come in handy without necessarily giving in all the way, right? To how do you say, just appease people. But this point also about the kids, right? I'm really curious how this informs mothers or fathers who are of a different ethnicity, because I think one of the challenges for me is denial. Like, if you do marry or date someone who's of another ethnicity, just I've met people who just like hope for the best and hope nothing ever like bad will happen and the kids will never face like anything. I just think that's not very realistic, and so it's important to just, I hear these things about affirming people's identity and this and that, and that's because shit happens, right? As you, even when you're little, like kids encounter comments or insults or, stuff like that. And so I just think that is going to be important, affirming their sense of self, preparing the parents, right, to how to broach those conversations if they're not of the same group. So I'm just real curious what that has looked like for people, because it didn't happen so well in my family. I'll just say, like, a lot of the noise was inside the home. So I'm happy to hear these parents, saying like, oh, they're already thinking about their kids.
Yeah, it is exciting. And feel free, for those of you that are listening, to drop in the chat how maybe you're doing this at home. I know, I think for one of the things I can say from my experience is my mom came here when she was 14. So she spent most of her life here. So she also, now what she did carry with her when she came, but there was also a lot that she couldn't know or teach me about her background, because she, started working when she started working at 9 in a tortilla factory, so she has finished 3rd grade, and she didn't know a lot of the history surrounding Mexico and stuff like that. So a lot of that, for me, I personally had to learn, and I learned through, when I went to college, I was part of Latino organizations. And so that's where I started learning more about, historical events and people, and, even things like Cesar Chavez. I had no idea who he was until I got to college. And one of the advisors of the Latino group, was really instrumental in teaching me a lot about our history. But prior to then, there was just such a disconnect. And so I had to learn. And then I took a class in Latin American studies and, kind of self-educated myself. I have someone here that says, I've connected with so many and made a few friends thanks to meetings like this, and like many, and the many organizations. I just typed Latino in LinkedIn search and discovered Latina professionals, Latinas rising up in HR, Latinas in tech, and Latinas in the boardroom, Latino Leadership Institute, and Hispanic Executive. There are many more, so I encourage everyone to check them out. Yeah, the groups are definitely out there for sure. And I'm just going to quote one of my friends, Giovanna, who is the founder of the Making Leaders Move podcast. If you don't know where the community is, or if you don't have it, then the best thing to do is create it, right? So I encourage you to do that. Let's see. Groups like this and Latina professionals are amazing resources. I'd like to see Latinos and Latinas come together. It's definitely needed. And then that was the link to Canticos for anyone who wanted to learn more about those board books. But for those of those that you listening in, feel free to drop some of your experiences into.
I have a question for you both. I wanted to know, like, this is something that I'm definitely seeing in my brother-in-law, but as the generations get older, do you think that, or as, generations change, do you think that this is a conversation that we'll keep having? Or what have you noticed about the younger generations? I work with youth, So I hear the conversations they're having every day. I'm just wondering what y'all think about that too.
So I'll just speak from my experience with my 16-year-old, almost 16-year-old son and his friends, and a lot of his friends are Latino. And it's funny because I was asking them one day, I was chauffeuring them around to wherever they were going to go, a friend's house or whatever, and there was my son and two of his friends in the car. And I don't know how we got on the topic, but I said, how do you identify? Was the question that I asked them, and it was interesting to hear because one was Brazilian and moved here from Brazil a couple years ago. And then the other one is, I know her mom's Hispanic. I can't remember what her dad was. But either way, I thought it was really interesting because they said, well, I don't really know. I feel like I don't know where I fit in because, like the Brazilian didn't know where she fit in. The other girl said, like, I don't know. I feel like kind of torn. Both of them felt torn. That's what they relayed to me, is they felt torn into how they identified. And, granted, they're in high school. And so I think there's still a lot of self-discovery going on, especially at that age. So it was interesting to hear that they're going through the exact same things that I've experienced at a much later age for me.
Yeah, definitely their access to technology or even conversations like this. Like, in high school, we were still using a Razor flip phone. Like, I would have never imagined that something like this was even possible.
I will say this really quick though, and Maria, jump in here too. But I will say this, I thought was really interesting. My son knows, I think also with technology, knows so much about music. He loves music. And he was telling me like that day that they went to this outing that I was driving him and his friends. He's like, oh yeah, we did karaoke and we sang to this, my friend Issa and I, we always like sing to the, a song by Selena. And I was like, you know who Selena is, And he's like, yeah. And he knows like different Spanish music that my mom listens to and his dad listens to and that I've listened to. And on a car ride home, like I was introducing him to like rock en español because I went to a lot of the concerts like my younger years and stuff like that. And I thought how music has become an outlet for him to connect to his culture too. And so that was kind of cool. I felt like we had created a new bond because of that.
Yeah. About just youth. I mean, that's why I want to talk to you, Jocelyn, to tell us what the future looks like. But I just know that it's very common to have kids grow up like with two cultures. And so I hope it just becomes more normalized and more visible. Because I think they might still face these issues as they get older, like in school and employment, as identity is still a category that shows up for, I don't know, to place people or to categorize people or to, I don't know, programs designed for different groups when it's still a political issue, right? So I don't think it's going to go away, but I do hope there's just more inclusion and visibility in spaces like this one where we talk about it and it's not like something to hide.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Lupita says, I entered my stepkids' life when they were 6 and 8, and now 18 and 21. Now they say they feel awesome to have been exposed to my Mexican culture and feel a part of it when we go to my family's house. It's great to be part of their growing culture identity.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I've been wondering with like all these divisions we have in this country. Like, oh, what a cool example of like people coming together, right? And yeah, there's always like issues, but it's kind of a beautiful thing too. And sometimes it's the only way people can see through a lot of the noise, like getting to know people on an individual level.
Yeah. It's funny because Cinco de Mayo was last week, as we all know, right? And my boyfriend is white, and he said something the day before about like tomorrow Cinco de Mayo, And I was like, Cinco de Mayo. And he cuts me off. He's like, Ruby, I've been with you for 3 years. I know it's not Mexican Independence Day. And yes, I know it's appropriation, because he already knew where I was going to go with it. And it cracked me up. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I've trained you well. And, I'm kidding. But what I thought was interesting was someone then messaged me a private, DM. And, I think he had laughed at it or whatever at first, but he said, but that's how it starts, is like, because now he has the education around it and he can share that with other people. And I just never even really thought about it in that way. But really it is through relationships that we learn, whether we're talking about, Latino culture or other cultures, like this is part of it, is just having relationships and being open and being willing to listen and to learn from each other and realize that there's a lot of mixed experiences and that's okay.
Yeah,
Right?
that's one thing that like this experience, even though we even have similar experiences, it's not a monolith. And that's like a huge part of understanding identity and culture too.
Yeah, because as much as we share together that it's alike, there's also different nuances that we've had, right? Just in our upbringings and lived experiences. Such a beautiful conversation. So I know we are at the end of our hour. Thanks everyone for joining in. Thanks for hanging in with me with my technical difficulties. I knew Maria and Jocelyn that you guys would keep it going. I appreciate just the conversation and the time. And for our listeners, feel free to, catch the replay or jump in with comments later on. I really appreciate all the engagement and feedback and sharing that happened. This is a space where we can just have conversations that are real and authentic. And, there's no judgment here about, whether you're Latino enough or not. Like, you're accepted in your exactly as you are. And so, everyone is on their own journey and we just want to respect and honor that. And Jocelyn and Maria, any closing words before we head out?
Thank you everyone for just listening and giving us the space and platform to be able to have this conversation. I love this conversation. I love any kind of conversation. So if you do want to connect with me on LinkedIn or even like Instagram or something, I'd love to continue this conversation as well.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for organizing, for speaking. Hope we can connect with everyone. Isela, I saw your comment about Cinco de Mayo. Yeah, all this is really complex, and so it can mean a lot of things. And you're right, it has like a Southwest history too. So all of it's true. And yeah, but my big takeaway is like, I don't know, you don't try to prove yourself to anyone, and hopefully there can be more visibility about just how complex people's experiences, and they're all valuable. So thanks for the time.
Don't wait till you're over 40 to not care anymore. That's my advice. But it is true. After 40, it all goes.
Soon enough.
Yeah. So everyone have a great Wednesday. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I will see you next week, y'all. Have a great one.
Bye.